The invitation came in the mail. It wasn't to attend as a guest, but to work. Catering Contract, Palmer 40th Anniversary Celebration, was printed in fancy gold letters on the cream envelope. My hands shook as I opened it, already guessing what was inside. I'm Charlotte Palmer, a 35-year-old chef in Boston. My restaurant man has 2 Michelin stars and a 6-month waiting list. But to my parents, I'm still a disappointment. I chose cooking over law school and embarrassed them by working with my hands instead of following the path they wanted. The contract listed the details: 200 guests, dietary needs, and a menu that screamed safe and boring. Exactly the kind of food my mom would pick. At the bottom, her signature was there with a note. We expect nothing but perfection, Charlotte. Don't embarrass us. I put the contract on my kitchen counter, next to the pile of mail. Among the letters was one I had avoided opening for days, something from my grandmother's lawyer. For some reason, it now felt like the right time to open it. With steady hands, I read it. Dear Miss Palmer, as executor of Eleanor Palmer's estate, I'm pleased to inform you that you are the sole inheritor of her estate and shares in Palmer Industries. I read it 3 times before it sank in. My grandmother, my father's mother, left everything to me. Not to him, not to my perfect sister Margaret. Just me, the estate, the company's shares, and even her vineyard in Napa, all mine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Have you reviewed the contract? We need an answer by tomorrow. Your father insists on having man cater this event. Of course he did. They never ate at my restaurant or acknowledged my success. But now they wanted to use my name to impress their friends. I thought about all the family events I'd been excluded from, how they always made me feel like I didn't belong. I replied, I'll do it. Send me the guest list and I'll take care of everything. Her response came quickly. Excellent. The guest list is attached. Remember, nothing too experimental. These are sophisticated people, Charlotte. I opened the guest list. It was filled with the most important names in Boston society. My name wasn't on it, of course. I was just the help. That night, as I reviewed the contract at my restaurant, my sous chef, Marcus, knocked on the door. Boss, you okay? You've been staring at that paper for an hour. I looked up, an idea forming in my head. Marcus, remember the pop-up concept we talked about? The one with interactive tables and performance elements. His eyes lit up. The one where dinner is like theater. Yeah, but you said it was too risky for Maine. It is, I said with a grin. But I've found the perfect event to try it out. He raised an eyebrow. Your parents' anniversary? Are you sure that's a good idea? I handed him the letter from my grandmother's lawyer. His eyes widened as he read it. Holy, Charlotte, this changes everything. Yes, I said, finally feeling confident. Yes, it does. Call the team. We're going to give my parents an anniversary they'll never forget. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into planning. Every detail was perfect. I hired performers, created custom tables with screens, and designed a menu that told a story. My mom kept calling me, trying to control everything. Charlotte, the Hendersons are vegetarian now, and the Whittakers don't eat shellfish. Can you handle all of this? She'd say. Every time I calmly told her, everything is under control. I didn't tell her about my real plans. A week before the party, my sister Margaret came to my restaurant during dinner service. She stood at the front, perfectly dressed in her fancy suit, looking down on everything. Charlotte, she called out loudly, ignoring the stares from the other guests. We need to talk about the anniversary party. I took her to my office and shut the door. What's wrong, Margaret? I asked. Mother is worried you'll try something too creative, she said, examining her nails. She's heard about your experimental dishes. This needs to be a proper event, not one of your artistic ideas. I smiled, thinking about what I had planned. Tell Mother not to worry. This will be exactly the kind of event our family deserves. Margaret gave me a suspicious look but didn't argue. As she walked away, I felt a moment of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Use their anniversary to make a point? Then I thought about all the birthdays they ignored, the cold shoulders at family events, and the way they always reminded me I wasn't good enough. Yes, I decided. Yes, I was. On the date of the event, I arrived early with my team. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was transformed. There were interactive tables with built-in screens, hidden projectors, and a custom sound system. It was exactly how I envisioned it. My mom showed up to check everything, her face tight with worry. "Charlotte, what are these screens? This looks more like a tech show than a celebration." "Trust me, Mother," I said firmly. "Everything is perfect, just like you wanted." She didn't look convinced, but it was too late to change anything. The guests would be here soon, and the event I had planned was about to begin. Little did they know, this party would be talked about for years, just not in the way they expected. At 6 o'clock p.m., the guests started arriving in their finest clothes. From the kitchen, I watched as my parents greeted everyone, smiling and thanking them for coming. My father looked sharp in his tuxedo, and my mother wore a stunning designer gown. They looked like the perfect power couple they always tried to be. I checked my watch minus 20 minutes until dinner. My team moved quickly and smoothly, ready to bring my vision to life. The interactive tables were set up, the projectors tested, and everything timed perfectly. "Charlotte," Marcus, my sous chef, said softly, "the lawyer is here." I nodded, spotting Mr. Harrison, my grandmother's attorney, taking a seat at a central table. He was one of the only people who knew my plan, and his presence was key. At exactly 6:30, my mother tapped her glass, signaling everyone to sit down. The tables looked normal, but their glossy surfaces were about to light up. Everything was ready. Before we began dinner, my mother stood and spoke. "Before we start," she said, her voice ringing through the room, "Robert and I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate 40 years of marriage." My mother began, smiling graciously. "And of course, we must thank Charlotte for catering tonight's meal." A polite round of applause followed, but I noticed she didn't say our daughter, just Charlotte. That distance was always there, keeping me at arm's length. I stepped out of the kitchen, giving a polite nod to the guests. My father didn't even glance my way, too busy chatting with his business friends. Margaret sat at the family table, perfectly put together, sneaking judgmental looks at me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. The first course was served, a simple heirloom tomato soup. As the bowls were set down, the glossy tables suddenly lit up with projections. Images played on the surfaces, showing scenes from my childhood. Me sitting alone at the kitchen counter while the rest of the family enjoyed dinners together in the dining room. Holidays where I was sent to help the staff, never a part of the celebration. Guests murmured, unsure of what they were seeing. My mother's face tightened, but she stayed silent to avoid causing a scene. "This soup," I said, my voice steady, "is made from tomatoes grown in my grandmother Eleanor's garden. The same garden where she taught me to cook while the rest of you were too busy to notice I was even there." For the second course, perfectly seared scallops were served. The tables came alive again, showing clips from my culinary school graduation, an event my parents didn't bother to attend. Other images showed the opening night of my restaurant, glowing reviews from critics, and the day I earned my first Michelin star. "These scallops," I explained, "are paired with a sauce made from wine produced at Eleanor Palmer's vineyard. The same vineyard, along with her estate and shares in Palmer Industries, that she left to me in her will." The room went silent. My father's head shot up, his face pale. My mother froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. "What did you say?" my father demanded, standing so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Mr. Harrison, my grandmother's lawyer, stood up from his table and cleared his throat. "It's true, Mr. Palmer. Eleanor's will was clear. Everything, the estate, the vineyard, and her 30% controlling interest in Palmer Industries, was left to Charlotte." The ballroom buzzed with shocked whispers. My father's business partners exchanged glances, knowing what this meant. With my grandmother's shares, I now had significant control over the company he'd spent his life building. "This is ridiculous," Margaret snapped, her polished composure cracking. "There must be some mistake. Why would grandmother leave everything to her?" I smiled. "Because, Margaret, while you and Dad were busy running the company and ignoring her, I spent every Sunday cooking with her, listening to her stories, and sharing her love of food. She saw me when none of you did." The main course arrived, perfectly aged ribeye with truffle butter. The tables displayed one final set of images. My grandmother and me cooking together in her kitchen, both of us laughing. There was a video of her last Christmas, when she chose to have dinner at my restaurant instead of the family mansion. The last image showed her tasting my food and crying as she told me how proud she was of me. "This main course," I said, my voice steady even as I fought back emotion, "is served with vegetables from Eleanor's garden and wine from her vineyard. She always said good food brings people together. but only if they're willing to sit at the same table as equals. My father was still standing, his face twisted in anger. Charlotte, he growled, we need to talk. Now. No, Dad, I said calmly. We don't. Everything has already been decided. The papers were signed this morning. I paused, then added, but don't worry, I won't run the company the way you did. I believe in giving people a chance, no matter who they are or where they come from. The rest of the dinner continued in tense silence, with only the quiet murmurs of guests trying to process everything that had just happened. My mother sat stiffly in her chair, barely touching her food. Margaret kept glaring at me with anger, while my father looked like he had aged years in just a few minutes. For dessert, we served a deconstructed apple pie using my grandmother's recipe. Before the guests could dig in, I made one final announcement. In honor of my grandmother's memory and her belief in nurturing talent, I'm starting a culinary scholarship program. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation will provide full funding for aspiring chefs who may not fit society's expectations but have the passion and drive to succeed. The room went quiet as my words sank in. This wasn't just about the inheritance or company shares. It was about creating opportunities for others who have been overlooked, just like I once was. The evening ended sooner than expected. Guests made polite excuses to leave, uncomfortable with the heavy tension. After everyone had gone, my father finally approached me. His face was pale, and his voice was barely above a whisper. You've ruined everything. Was this your plan? To humiliate us in front of everyone? I looked him in the eye. No, Dad, my plan was to show you what you've missed all these years, what you threw away because it didn't fit your perfect vision of this family. The next morning, the story of my parents' anniversary dinner had already spread through Boston's social circles. Everyone was talking about how Charlotte Palmer, the outcast daughter, had inherited her grandmother's fortune and used the celebration to reveal it. I sat in my office at Maine, reviewing the documents Mr. Harrison had prepared. The transfer of ownership was complete. I now controlled my grandmother's estate and had significant influence over Palmer Industries. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from Margaret ranged from angry threats to desperate pleas for reconciliation. My mother sent guilt-filled messages and offers to discuss things like family. But the message that caught my attention was my father's email. It read, Charlotte, what you did last night was calculated and cruel. You've embarrassed this family and potentially damaged the company I've spent my life building. If this was revenge, congratulations. You succeeded. Dad. I read it twice before replying. Dad, this wasn't about revenge. It was about showing you what you missed, not just with me, but with your own mother. While you were busy building your empire, you didn't see what was happening in your family. Grandma saw it, and that's why she made the choices she did. I don't plan to damage the company. Unlike you, I believe in giving people chances. If you want to talk about the future, come to Maine tonight at 8. Charlotte. To my surprise, he showed up. I watched from the kitchen as he walked into the restaurant, looking uneasy. He had never been to Maine before, never tasted my food, or acknowledged my success. I led him to a private dining room where I had prepared a simple meal. His mother's recipes, the comfort food she used to make when he was a child. As he sat down, I noticed how tired he looked. He stared at the bowl of beef stew in front of him. Your grandmother used to make this every Sunday, he said quietly. I know, I replied softly. She taught me. She told me stories about you while we cooked. How much you loved this stew. How you used to help her in the kitchen before the business took over your life. He took a bite, his hands trembling slightly. It tastes exactly the same, he whispered. She wanted you to have more than just the business, I said gently. She wanted you to remember what it was like to care about something more than success and status. That's why she left everything to me, not to hurt you, but to make you stop and think. For the next 2 hours, we talked more than we had in years. He shared his own dreams of becoming a chef before his father pushed him into business. I told him stories about Grandma he'd never heard, moments he missed while chasing success. As the night ended, he said, I don't expect forgiveness. What we did to you, how we treated you, it was wrong. I'm not looking for apologies, I replied. I want real change, starting with how Palmer Industries treats its employees and how it defines success. He nodded slowly. And how do we do that? First, we properly establish the Eleanor Palmer Foundation, not just scholarships but programs for employees' children, support for small businesses, and community outreach. Then, we change the company culture. No more promoting people just because they fit a mold. To my surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to cook," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "Your grandmother's recipes." 6 months have passed since everything changed. Every Sunday, my father comes to Mam before we open. We cook together, sharing moments that were once unimaginable. As we cook, he sometimes tells me stories about his mother, stories I had never heard before. Margaret eventually came around, especially after I invited her to learn baking with me. She's surprisingly good with pastries, though she would never admit it to her society friends. My mother took longer to adjust, but even she has started joining our Sunday cooking sessions. Just last week, she asked me to teach her how to make grandmother's apple pie. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation is thriving. We've already provided scholarships to 15 aspiring chefs, and our community programs are making a real difference. Palmer Industries is changing too, slowly but steadily. It's becoming a company that values more than just profits. As for me, I'm still running Man, creating and experimenting with dishes. But now, when I glance out into the dining room, I sometimes see my family there, enjoying the meals I've made. It's not perfect. We still have moments of tension, and old habits are hard to break. But something has shifted. Last night, as I watched my father carefully chopping vegetables, his tie tucked into his shirt to keep it clean, I realized something important. True healing isn't about revenge or making others pay for their mistakes. Sometimes it's about giving them a chance to change, to see the world differently, and to experience what they've missed. My grandmother understood that. She left me her legacy not to divide us, but to bring us together again, around a different kind of table. On Mound's menu, we still feature the tomato soup from that fateful anniversary dinner. Under its description, there's a small note. From Eleanor's garden, where every meal tells a story and every story deserves to be heard. It's become our most popular dish.